Statistics South Africa says the cost of living has risen more quickly for poorer people and people in Mpumalanga and the Free State than others. They've been looking at inflation data to make these findings. Patrick Kelly is the head of price statistics at Statistics South Africa. Patrick, good afternoon to you. We're all used to seeing the monthly inflation rate, the CPI. But why does inflation move at different rates for different people? Why do richer people have lower inflation than poorer people?
Well, they do at the moment. It's not always the case. But at the moment, food inflation is particularly high. And poorer people spend a larger proportion of their household budget on food and non-alcoholic beverages and other essentials. This pushes their overall inflation rate higher because we weight those items more highly for those particular households.
So in other words, if you have very little money, you spend almost all of your money on food. Because you spend almost all of your money on food, if food prices go up higher than other inflation, inflation's higher for you.
I mean, that's the basic idea, but it's a bit more nuanced. So actually, they only spend about half of their money on food. If we talk about the poorest 10% of people in the country, approximately 50% of their money goes to food. So they do spend on other items, and I think that that's important, that we're not just animals who need to eat, but we do have a range of human needs. For example, communication is highest as a proportion of household expenditure amongst the poor compared to all the other income groups.
I imagine transport's very high as well. All right, so how big has the difference been for poorer people in terms of inflation? I mean, food prices are always going to hit them hard, but this clearly they've been very badly affected by what's happened in the last year.
Yeah, so we're talking about probably overall kind of a couple of percentage points. For the poor, they're at approximately 9%. Average inflation, whereas for other, national inflation is at about 7%. But that is quite a significant difference. And obviously, the poorer you are, the less flexibility you have in terms of reprioritizing your expenses because you don't have that much, and you would want to look after your basic needs.
And then the differences in different provinces. Why do people in different provinces experience different inflation rates?
Okay, so I'm going to, slightly technically again, there's a lot of moving parts. So in different provinces, there is different proportions of expenditure on different items. I had to take a little look at the provinces that are really experiencing the highest levels of inflation, which are Mpumalanga, the Free State, and KwaZulu-Natal. And all of these have had inflation above 8% since about June, July last year, and have been trending quite high. We can definitely see for these that food inflation is a lot higher. So in April, food inflation for the country was at 13.9%, but for the Free State, which was the highest, was at 15.7%. And particularly within that, the cereals component, which does make up our staples, was at 26.9% for the Free State compared to 20.8% for the country as a whole. So these are quite big differences. I wouldn't really be able to say why there are specific differences and what the kind of market dynamics are that cause these differences to come into account, I'm afraid.
I mean, I do wonder, some provinces, for example, if you're going to work, you probably have bigger distances to travel. That could perhaps be one factor. But I'd imagine most of the supermarket chains where people buy quite a large proportion of foods, the prices would be the same. Of course, with the spaza shops, it may be different, and we know how important those are for millions of people.
Yeah, the trend we've kind of picked up amongst chain stores is that some of them do standardize their prices across the country and others don't. So there's certainly quite a lot of variation in the prices that we pick up. Look, I think, interestingly, just because they have higher inflation for food does not necessarily mean that overall people are paying more for particular food items. I had to take a little look into some of the average prices that we compile. And in fact, none of these three provinces have higher prices than the national average for kind of the key staples like bread and maize meal. What is interesting, though, is that one of the other big factors pushing higher inflation in these provinces are housing costs. So we measure rentals, and we use that in various ways also to estimate the costs of owning and living in your own house. But all of these provinces really do have quite significantly higher housing costs and housing inflation than the rest of the country, and also higher kind of municipal tariff increases related to water and housing levies, kind of if you live in a complex, the levy that you pay. So these are some of the services factors that also play into these higher inflation levels.
Patrick, I'm afraid I did maths on standard grade and didn't pass economics 1, so bear with me while I try and put what I'm trying to say to you in words that will actually make sense. But do you find that when we have a period of high inflation, as we do now, there is more variability, both between the inflation rates experienced by the rich and the poor and the inflation rates experienced by people in different provinces? In other words, when times are really relatively easy, when inflation is relatively low, do you find there might be less variability? And at times when inflation may be high and times are tough, there may be more variability, or even the other way around?
Yeah, sure. No, that is definitely true, because it's particularly if inflation is targeted within some specific groups that may have higher weights in some provinces or income groups than others, you would certainly start to find some divergence amongst those inflation rates. I think what's also relevant is if we go back to the poor, over a period of time, the poor experience a lot more volatility in their overall inflation rates, which can clearly also be quite destabilizing.
Patrick Kelly, thank you. Head of Price Statistics at Statistics South Africa.